Hello, awesome people. I hope you're having a great day today. Today we're taking a look at the next short story in the Unreal and Real collection by Ursula K. LeGuin. It's a 16-page long short story called Unlocking the Air for you folks. It's also not a fantasy or science fiction short story. I picked this collection to read a short story that was 8 pages long called Those Who Walk Away from Omelas, which is a Hugo Award-winning short story that was also heavily influential in a recent short television show called Star Trek Strange New Worlds in their first season. Where they took from one of those. That's where I heard of it, and so I was like, I want to read that. So I picked up this collection. Now I've been doing a deep dive into it. So now we're going to look at, like I mentioned, the short story that we're taking a look at today for you folks. So this short story is really more of has an unusual style to it. Basically, each section, each paragraph is separated from the previous one and can go on for quite some time, although it starts off pretty short, and it will start off with this is a blank, and then it will explain that blank. For example, the first one will say, and here I'll read it for you to kind of show you what I'm talking about for you folks. Again, Unlocking the Air. This is a fairy tale. People stand in the lightly falling snow. Something is shining, trembling, making a silvery sound. Eyes are shining, voices sing. People laugh and weep. Clasp one another's hands, embrace. Something shines and trembles. They live happily ever after. The snow falls on the roofs and blows across the parks, the squares, and the river. So that is the start of the Unlocking the Air short story. Right, and there's like 3 or 4 lines, and then the next paragraph begins, and it says, this is history. Once upon a time, a good king lived in his palace in a kingdom far away, but an evil enchantment fell upon the land. The wheat withered in the ear, the leaves dropped from the trees of the forest, and no thing thrived. And then the next one will begin, this is a stone. And so we'll continue like that throughout this story. And I think that's an interesting choice for a few reasons, but it does hurt my ability to believe what's actually happening or get sort of involved with it, because like every single paragraph, and soon these will become a lot longer than a paragraph, they'll be pages long or have like conversations and so forth. These will have a different section of a story, kind of like a separate short story, if you will. And so I'm not sure why Ursula K. LeGuin did this for this short story. I had a high school teacher who said that the structure of a thing that you're reading supports its meaning, right? So take as a good example of that, Dracula by Bram Stoker, right? Who has a list, who's not just writing a vampire novel, but it has in it novels and documents in it, right? Newspaper articles are in there, journal articles are in there, diary articles are in there, and there's actually a photographic record that's in there too. That's actually shown, right? It shows real world documents in order to show that this novel is actually happening as true, right? The structure of that supports the fact that this is actually a true thing, right? Rather than you just saying, oh, it's a vampire story. Of course, it's fantasy, right? It helps you to buy into that believable. But I'm not sure why Ursula K. LeGuin did that in this short story. So it detracts from me and also hurts its buy-in. Because every single one of those is a self-contained story of something that's happening, right? So one of the characters in this short story is also the key character from the previous 2 short stories, Brothers and Sisters, and A Weekend in the Country. This is a sequel. It clearly feels to a sequel to, and it's the next short story in that collection. But it also feels like it's an interesting way, because he's not married with the kids, but he's not introduced until like halfway through the short story. So it's not really a sequel like A Week in the Country was to Brothers and Sisters with him as the main character. He's just here. I guess you would call him the main character if anybody is, but it's really different. And again, I'm not sure why she did it, and the structure helps me to get really sort of involved in this short story. So I really feel that this is probably more of a 6 out of 10. I feel like that interferes with my ability to really sort of buy into what's happening. It doesn't have a traditional, beginning or middle or end, right? There's not a plot to this in any major ways that are happening, right? And so I also mentioned at the front that this is not a fantasy or a horror or a science fiction short story. So why would I review it? Well, it's Ursula K. LeGuin. She's one of the most influential people in fantasy and in science fiction too. She's beloved in both. She's won Hugos for you folks, right? before I grabbed this short story collection, I had done reviews of 2 novels by her. One of her classics, The Left Hand of Darkness, which I read about 4 or 5 years ago before I started doing this channel. And then I also read a novel for this channel that was in my bucket list called The Lathe of Heaven, which was also, if you'll recall, one of my favorite novels that I read that year. So she's definitely a beloved person. So that's one of the reasons why we're doing a deep dive into her, even though some of the 39 short stories in more than 700 page long collection this thing is, are not in those 2 genres that she's heavily influential with. She's known from like the Wizard of Earthsea stuff, in her fantasy stuff that's beloved for children's kids. That introduced, by the way, the idea of the kid wizard in wizard school, the genre of fantasy that would be picked up with and made popular with things like Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling and other people that copied J.K. She really doesn't get the appreciation that she deserves from doing this ahead of time. Like, I don't remember an interview with J.K. Rowling saying, "Oh yeah, I read a Wizard of Earthsea series or the first book when I was a kid, loved it, so I decided to go ahead and do that with my characters too because I loved it so much." Or I heard about it, right? Or but I never actually read it, right? She never has given a shout out to Ursula K. LeGuin, despite the fact that you're reading Ursula K. LeGuin stuff in the Harry Potter world when you go back and read it or you watch those movies. So it's kind of fun. But there you are. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. So again, I do a review of her stuff because her stuff was so influential to the genres that this channel cares about science fiction and fantasy. I also care about horror too, but I don't know if any of her stuff is in horror. But she's key influences in those 2 genres, so we're doing reviews of them. Also, I've done reviews of people like the guy who wrote Conan the Barbarian is a key influence in fantasy. Robert E. Howard through Conan the Barbarian. There's a lot of Conan clones that happen. He's also a pre-Tolkienian fantasy writer. It's usually influential on fantasy. He also wrote some short stories in the boxing genre, and he actually has more boxing short stories than Conan short stories of his main character. But so I've done reviews of those, and nobody's pushed back and said, "Why are you reviewing?" Because it's Robert E. Howard. He also wrote some horror stuff too in the Cthulhu mythos, enough to have an entire book published. In fact. That I care about since I do horror. Also, he has done some short stories in the westerns and some other things too. That was actually pretty common back then, before genreification. A lot of writers would write things in other genres. It happened pretty commonly too. So, for example, Stephen King's written novels that aren't horror, and if I were to do one of those, I don't think anybody would push back and say, "Why are you doing a Stephen King novel?" Right? That's not in the horror genre because that's what he's known for, and that's what I'm doing for my channel. So again, I don't think anybody would push back. And again, I'm doing the same thing here with Ursula K. LeGuin. So, the title of my channel, The Worst Thing About New Books, is a quote by a French philosopher, Jacques Joubert, who said that the worst thing about new books was that they kept us from reading the old books. So in this case, all the books that are all these things were published in her. Most of them are published in the 60s and the 70s. I was born in 75, so I'm in the mid 70s. So many of her things were published before I was even born. Right. So clearly those are older things that we have not gone back and read and so forth. So those are going back and reading these things are a passion project of mine. So that's one of the reasons why we're covering them and doing a deep dive. So that's cool. So there you are. That's my review of Unlocking the Air. The 16-page short story that I knocked out last night, about 32 minutes. It was pretty fast, even though this book is pretty oversized and pretty epic to read. So there you go. But again, I only gave it a 6 out of 10. So if you've read it, what'd you think about it? Let's talk about it in the comments below. And if you agree or disagree with my 6 out of 10, let's talk about that too. If you enjoyed this, why not hit that subscribe button? There'll be a lot more of these to follow. And then finally, I just want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and investing it and watching my video, because we all have so many things that are happening in our lives and we're pulled in so many different directions. So the fact that you spent this time with me is incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it. So thanks again, and have an amazing day.